this meeting.
Welcome to the Other Goddess channel with Dr. Joanna Kujawa, spiritual detective. Here we discuss the archetypes of Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene, sexuality and spirituality, and other fascinating topics. And today I would like to introduce to this channel Annalisa Derr. I've met Annalisa quite recently when she was interviewing me about my book, The Other Goddess. I will show it again. I'm so happy about that. And where I discussed the goddesses of Eros, tantric goddesses, Mary Magdalene, but also some Western erotic goddesses, including goddess Inanna. And as we were talking, it turns out that Annalisa actually wrote the whole of PhD on goddess Inanna. And not only that, she also landed a very good publishing contract with Inner Traditions to convert her PhD into a book. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me.
Congratulations. Inner Traditions is a very good spiritual publisher for those who don't know. So this is really something. And I thought immediately thought, oh, we have to do now the other interview, that I'm interviewing Annalisa. So the way I like to do this is that I would prefer to ask you, to tell us about yourself, in the sense that, what really led you to this journey to the goddess, because Annalisa also has a YouTube channel, Journey to the Goddess TV, and is obviously very interested and follows the path, including her own PhD and now a book and a YouTube channel and all of this. So could you kind of lead us how actually you end up on this path?
Absolutely. Yes. So I think like any good goddess path, it's not a straight line. It's more, it's more spiralic or like a labyrinth or like a wave. Anyway, I like the spiral image. And I would say it consciously began when I was in my 20s, and I was working with a spiritual mentor, teacher of mine, who's actually native Australian. Her name is Carrie Henwood, but she was living in the United States at that time. And it started to open me up to kind of other dimensions and other realities and kind of a multifaceted way of understanding spirituality that resonated so much more for me than my Christian upbringing did. And I grew up non-denominational Christian. So what really sticks out for me about that experience of growing up non-denominational was the singing. It was very bhakti-like, I think, which is why I also feel very comfortable, in that kind of bhakti environment, of that devotional singing and chanting. It feels very much like home for me. So I was also acting when I was living in New York. I was performing and acting, and I ended up going to South India with this New York theater-based theater group, and we were training in these really ancient dance lineages. Some of them reportedly, allegedly over 2,000 years old, maybe even more. Yeah. And it was in that experience where not only did I understand, I had a very visceral experience of art and spirituality as one co-creative expression. But also I encountered the goddess for the first time through the dances. Like we got to dance the different goddess archetypes, but also through the culture and through the land itself is so feminine, Mother Earth. I forget the name right now that they use for Mother Earth. I know there's many. Devi, I think, is one name. And through all the colors of the saris and the scents, it just was such a sensuous experience of goddess. And I remember sitting on the beach at the end of my program, reading a book about, it was a Rudolf Steiner book about Mary, Sophia, and Isis. And I was like, okay, I really resonate with the goddess, but it's that I'm experiencing here in India through the Hindu culture, but it's not my tradition. And I remember just kind of gazing back, in my mind's eye, where is she? She's missing in my tradition. Where is she? And I didn't even know who Mary Magdalene was growing up, because in these more kind of, Protestant offshoots, Mary Magdalene isn't a focal point, at all. And really neither is Mother Mary. So when I went back to the United States, and I was really hungry and really sincerely searching for this lost goddess. And I was in meditation one day, and I felt the presence of Mary Magdalene rise up in me. And I just knew to be fair, I had started reading about her, but I just felt so strongly that she was going to be my guide and my guru on this quest for this missing divine feminine. And from there, I ended up leaving my acting career behind, putting everything in storage, leaving New York and going on a Mary Magdalene pilgrimage by myself to the south of France for almost a month. And I had been looking at graduate school leading up to that because I was just so hungry to learn more about Mary Magdalene. I was like, who is this woman? And oddly enough, I had randomly received in the mail, like several years earlier, this pamphlet to study mythology at a school in Santa Barbara, California. And I was like, this is weird. I've never inquired about graduate school ever. Why? How did they find my name? Why am I getting this? But it stuck with me. And at the end of the pilgrimage, I had this actually very profound visionary experience, kind of shamanic visionary experience with Inanna. Mm-hmm. And it was like she, together with Mary Magdalene, I'm still kind of parsing this out in my psyche, how to talk about this. They kind of both, I feel like, initiated me into the next stage of my journey, which was graduate school. It was like all green lights. And it was like, do you want to learn more about Mary Magdalene? Go do this. Like, this is how you're going to get the depth of experience. And so took me there. I spent 7 years there. I wrote almost every paper about Mary Magdalene. And then oddly enough, when it came time to choose my dissertation topic, and I was like trying to, I was like, what do I want to say? And she was just, and I really feel like it was her essence, her Shakti that brought me there. And she was with me the whole time. But she was like, I'm taking you into a deeper experience of what it means to be female. You're going to rewrite these narratives that have been used to, demonize, to degrade, to humiliate women, just in the same way that I have been, treated that way.
And we are going to discuss it just for viewers, and we are going to discuss it later, right? This part, yeah.
Yes, and so that was basically how that was basically my journey. And then, interesting enough, I realized actually at the end of writing my dissertation that the journey to the goddess actually started 2 decades even prior to that, on a kind of a family trip to Hawaii. Mm-hmm. And we were there to honor my grandmother's passing. And we were there with my godmother, who has since passed, and she showed us how, she kind of led us through a ritual to do that. And I was so enchanted by this lava, by Pele's lava. And I said, can I take this with me? And she was like, well, because there's a lot of lore around taking the lava, and many people send it back because they take it without permission and terrible things happen. And so she's like, if you have to create a reciprocal relationship, a reciprocity with her. And so I promised to research and learn more about her, which I eventually fulfilled 20 years later. But it was through that experience and meeting Pele, the goddess Pele, and like developing this deep obsession with the hibiscus flower, the red hibiscus flower, so much so that the moment I turned 18, I got it tattooed on my back. And then when I finally read Sally Kempton's Awakening Shakti, and I discovered that the red hibiscus is the flower of Shakti, and specifically Kali, and I think Durga too, I was like, oh my God, she marked me. She was like, I mean, I don't mean that in kind of like a sadistic kind of way, but I felt like she was saying, like, I'm here. You were one of my children, years before I knew it consciously. So in that way, I've been on the journey for a very long time.
That's very interesting, because usually the journey starts much earlier than we thought, So when I was thinking when my journey started, I thought it started quite late because, consciously, but actually, as I say in my book, it started when I was in a church, a little girl in a church, and it's just this something happens, but you have to almost mature, to take on this journey consciously. And actually in many
Yes.
spiritual traditions, whatever journey you take, at least you have to wait till 16, like that they just, so because obviously I guess our human mind and the psyche has to develop well enough, right, to go consciously undertake the journey. Otherwise it is maybe very spontaneous and beautiful journey, but not completely conscious. So that's really interesting. Another point that I would like to add is that we all have the same experience when we start a spiritual journey, that we are asked to basically shed the old skin, right? Like you said,
yes.
you had to like, you gave up acting and went on pilgrimage. And I still kind of struggle with my academic career because I continue, but actually I'm following a completely different path in some ways. And interestingly, it comes back to us once we moved away from this in a better form, right? Like I'm sure you still do performing arts associated with the goddess, right? But
exactly.
not just acting like whatever, like I just got a good part, right?
Not at all. I don't even think she would let me.
This is what I mean. And when I try to do this like that, not with dancing, but with academia, it's just like I have almost like a vomiting reaction, like this is, it's like almost a punishment. You cannot do this anymore, you're here for a different reason. So I really like this kind of confirmation also from my guests and friends like yourself, that this is how it is. So that's fascinating. And what was the tradition? I'm sorry, I didn't get it. What was tradition about your grandmother? What was it?
Oh, my godmother. She was just a body worker and was very spiritual person. And she'd been living on the island of Hawaii doing the body work in a community. So she was just kind of passing on some rituals as she understood them.
Okay, so it wasn't because I thought I didn't want to miss it just in case. Okay, that's very interesting. And I would like to just jump straight into your PhD because I can't wait. So could you just in a little bit of detail tell us, what aspect of Goddess Inanna you discussed? Because now we know that, it just came to you. You actually did all the reading about Mary Magdalene and you were fascinated with Southern India and the goddesses there. And I just wondered, because before we actually moved to this, because somebody just sent me a message and I got this question a lot. So there are all of these traditions that honor goddess, and very often Western women refer to, Indian archetypes, but actually in India, women are treated very badly. So they say, can you comment on this? So, why is this kind of discrepancy? Do you have any comment? Because I know this person will be interested in other opinions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of depends on who you talk to. And I've read a little bit on this theory. I mean, like, for example, you have like these gurus like Amma, the hugging guru. And as I understand it, like, because she's believed to be the embodiment of the goddess, like she's not human. She's not really a human woman in that way. So she's on another level. So she doesn't get categorized as being mistreated. I think it has to do like it does in many cultures where you have like the historical process of the patriarchalization of the traditions. And even in India, you can see like the evidence of the pre-Vedic cultures and traditions. And then when the Vedas kind of started to proliferate and created different social hierarchies and the male priests, and a lot of, I think, from what I understand, the goddess traditions are either subsumed or changed so that this kind of male hierarchy is put into place.
That's right.
And then later you see the texts of Manu, which are very derogatory toward women. And I think that's around the time of Christ, Buddha era is when those were written.
So it's quite interesting because it's true, like pre-Vedic traditions were more goddess oriented. And then when something happens that even if the goddesses are mentioned, they're usually coupled with a male. So they're just becoming partners of.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So, and although, Saraswati is quite independent, but she's still a wife, right? So, so this independence kind of stays, but they are being kind of, they don't stand on their own, let's put it this way.
They're becoming domesticated almost.
Yeah, that's a good word.
And I think, and I write about that in my dissertation too. I don't talk about India because I focus on the Western tradition exclusively, but, I detail in Sumer, in, Babylon, in ancient Greece, in Judaism. So it's something that happened in that region I think we're finding more and more evidence now with the Indo-European invasions. And this really fascinates me. I don't know if you've heard or read about this, that, there was all this debate. Did these Indo-European invaders come into the subcontinent of India? Like, I have a friend that was like, who's Indian, who was like, we don't have any myths or any national or local myths about, outsiders invading the country. And then recently, because geneticists have been able to track the Y genome, they've been able to prove now that there have been mass migrations of mostly men, and probably bringing some of that Vedic. I think Vedism is a mixture of what was the local, native indigenous traditions and what was brought, because I think there's a lot of amazing philosophies in the Vedas, and I don't want to diminish.
I love the Vedas too. Yes, it's just
diminish what what the local people believed either, because it's very rich, especially because they honored the goddess. And the same article that I was reading was proposing basically that the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, like their most sacred texts, right, are the mythologization of these early invaders coming in, and the families that are kind of these invading families doing what they do. So I thought that was really an interesting development.
Yeah, thank you for this, because I just got just before our interview, I got this a long email, and I thought I have to respond to it, but I thought since you started to talk about it, it's nice to have another perspective. Okay, so thank you for this, and now let's jump. I can't wait about your PhD on Inanna.
All right. I got so distracted. Yeah, I know, this is so much fun. Right, so I discuss Inanna mostly toward the end of the dissertation, where I re-mythologize the descent of Inanna as a psychosomatic menstrual cycle journey. Okay, let me just bring you up to that point for a second, though. So basically, my thesis is that, again, talking about prior to these Indo-European invasions in Eurasia, menstrual blood specifically was revered as a sacred power that women embodied, the power of life and death, right? And there's evidence for this. And then with the Indo-European invasions and the patriarchalization of these different cultures in the region, and they're bringing their sky dominator gods. This is all through the work of Maria Gimbutas. That basically things associated with death became feared and demonized. And there's this connection between goddesses of death and like women's menstrual fluids, for example, that I touch on a little bit in the dissertation. So I try to connect that demonization and the sublimation of Ereshkigal, Medusa, and Lilith, for example, and with the fear of female bodily power. And then I bring us all the way up to the present, and I look at like the Enlightenment and modern science and medicine. I connect it to the past too. And I talk about how these narratives basically from the ancient world to the present, that menstruation is a symbol of danger, of illness, of toxicity, that it can cause harm and it can cause death, sometimes to people, sometimes to plants and animals, sometimes to male virility. I mean, it's all over the literature throughout time. And that these narratives, one, kind of serve to justify keeping women, in a lesser position to men. I mean, this is one of many things that, justifies the control of women.
Yes.
And two, that these narratives hurt women psychologically, then which I believe hurts us in the body somatically, because I believe in that psychosomatic connection. So then the last chapter is basically like, how do we remedy this? Well, we need a sacred narrative about menstruation.
Yes.
There are indigenous cultures around the world that still have these narratives, that still use them as a way to empower women, to enculturate them into their power, enculturate the whole community into the sacred power that women embody. So that's why I took this ancient Inanna myth, and I just, it was so clear to me as I was reading the myth over and over again that kind of what she's doing and what's happening is exactly what's happening biologically or biochemically, and kind of there's a psychological component too. So there's a couple layers. It gets really complex. And through the process too, because the way that I see the Inanna myth is that as we have it today, the oldest version that we have is kind of a mixture of the patriarchalization of that myth with elements of probably what was there prior to that. And so yeah, that's how I saw Inanna. And so part of the layer was actually re-imbuing the goddess with with the sacred power of life and death, and reconnecting Ereshkigal and Inanna, because I really saw them as two of the same goddess that maybe had another name altogether. I don't know. But that part of what happened in these ancient cultures when these patriarchal mythologies came through is the division of the goddess into these different personalities. So kind of like making them more one-dimensional and less powerful in a way.
I love it. And I love, can I just comment? And I love this kind of sweeping overview, you know, because I love working this way as well. I do not like to focus on detail. I just use detail so it can give me a bigger version, you know, of things, because I don't like personally, although I appreciate this kind of scholarship, I don't enjoy when people just focus on one thing, you know, and it translates it until it's dead, you know, because, you know, I think like we have to give it a broader view. And I think this is what from your description you actually did with your PhD, which I love it. And I also love the fact that, you know, you embodied Inanna, you know, through your thesis, you know, you made her feminine again, right? Because sometimes these goddesses, such as that are associated with death and life and war and wisdom, such as, for example, the Greek Athena, they are completely desexualized. And although, you know, I love wisdom, I prefer to identify with other goddesses, including Sophia, because Athena is so asexual. You know, she's just a man in a dress. She even looked like a man in a dress, you know. So in her sculptures, there's nothing of feminine there except for a name and that she's a daughter of Zeus. But there is nothing like nothing about her that you know can reminds you of being a woman. And another thing, this is a very sad thing about a couple of things about when we speak about menstruation, which is such a taboo, you know, and in a way to speak about, but as you know, in tantric traditions, mixing blood with mixing wine with menstrual blood was, you know, the superpower. It gives you this, you know, you do it before tantric ritual, before you walk like, you know, gods and goddesses on earth. You have to actually do this. So there's honoring of that. But yet, you know, in traditional religions nowadays, you know, women and men are separated, and women are untouchable during menstruation period, not because it's a sacred process, but because it's dirty. Right? It's considered dirty and unclean and actually polluting. And I remember in one of the indigenous traditions, actually, when I lived in Toronto, I heard from an indigenous person saying that, you know, that it's a bad luck to cross a path with a menstrual woman, a woman who's menstruating. You know, so it's even, you know, in all traditions, it is something that is vile, and in early saints when we're demeaning women, we're saying it's just a, you know, pile of bile and blood, and referring, I think, indirectly to menstruation. So it's somewhere it was misunderstood and feared, you know, and I think this power of giving life, because it comes with menstruation, like it or not, right, was actually feared by the, you know, patriarchal mind, basically, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could boil it down simply and talk about womb envy. And I think that a lot of the mythologies also reflect that. Zeus has womb envy. He has to birth Athena from his head and Dionysus from his leg, you know? So I think that that's
listen, Sigmund Freud. Listen, Sigmund Freud. You got it completely wrong, right? It's not a penis envy, it's a womb envy.
That's right. But I do have to say, I really do believe that that most indigenous cultures, at least in the Americas, revered menstruation. And if they don't now, I think most of the time it's because of too much of the indoctrination from kind of Christianizing belief systems, and because I mean that the Americas, both Canada and the United States, did such a thorough job, you know, creating an ethnocide, basically taking these people's culture from them. But and also I want to say, back to your point about tantrism and drinking the menstrual blood, science knows now that menstrual blood has regenerative T cells in it.
Wow.
And so, yeah, they're looking at ways to, I don't harvest it, maybe to help, as another way to help grow, you know, regenerate your body.
Wow, that's quite interesting that, you know, science actually backs it up now. So so can you just take us at least through a part of Inanna's journey as a menstrual cycle? Because I read it so many times, you know, the Inanna story, and I never got this idea. So clearly your idea is very original. So can you walk us a little bit through this?
Yes. So I wish I had my little, what's it, slide, but that's okay. So at the beginning, I'll just start from the beginning. Inanna is, you know, she's hearing the call of the great below. She's in her queenly splendor. I'm equating this with like the peak ovulation, when a woman is just vibrating and she's magnetic and full of life. And then she hears the call of the great below, and there's this kind of downward pull, you know, down to the sister, down in the great below. And the great below, I'm equating with the, you know, the lower part of the womb, the uterus. And the Kur, which is the underworld in Sumar, is where Eros lives. And so she's being pulled down there, much like when the woman hits the luteal phase of after ovulation. There starts to be a, you know, a general kind of pull downward, like in the fall season, kind of a disintegrating or a letting go process that starts to happen. And then do you want me to go detailed or just more like?
No, you can go in detail because it's very original. So if you don't mind to share this, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, it's
whatever you remember. Whatever you remember, right? Because I know you didn't memorize it. So
I know. And I was so anyway, so then she goes down, and the interesting thing about Inanna is, so I really went deep into a lot of the, especially more of the newer feminist or women-centered Assyrian information. There's a great Assyriologist, Gwendolyn Like, very dense scholarly work, but very good. Anyway, so when she goes down to the underworld, like on that journey toward the underworld, she does a few things, right? She has to let her Sukal know that that's kind of like her, it could be like her spirit guide or her higher self. There's kind of not one, no, they don't really know what it is. So we'll just call it like a spirit guide for now. And she informs her to do X, Y, and Z. If I can't, you know, if I don't, I'm going to the underworld, and if I don't, come back. And so she dresses herself in all of her queenly, womanly regalia. And remember that she's just queen of heaven and earth. So she has been, there's evidence that both she and Ereshkigal used to be cycling grain goddesses. So they would have experienced all aspects of the life, death, regenerative cycle. But it's like the only way that Inanna has connection to death now is through her, again, I'm going to say patriarchalization of her persona as a martial goddess. And that does come later. And there's evidence that, you know, this happened in a way, especially when we get to Ishtar, to kind of marry some of the cultures, to bring some of the cultures together under one Babylonian kingdom. Anyway, so I bring this up because she has no awareness now in the myth of what happens in the depths. She's cut off from that part of herself, much like modern women in the West are taught to kind of cut off, repress, ignore, begrudge, hate. Oh my God, you know. And so she takes all of her queenly attire. She dresses herself in, you know, these ointments and this breastplate, come man come. And it's all of her life-giving, their life-giving powers that she essentially dresses herself with. And the interesting thing is she also takes, and they're, okay, I get really excited about this piece because they are like laws, basically. They're attributes that come from the sacred May. And the sacred May are the laws and attributes of civilization, of Sumer civilization, okay? And so in another myth, she wins these sacred May from the god Enki, which I know you write about that briefly in your book too. And so interestingly enough, one of these laws, or two of them, is descent to the underworld and ascent from the underworld. Because in their mythology, no human or god and god can go to the underworld and come back except for Enki, who possesses those me. But she obtains them and she doesn't take it with her. So I find that really interesting. And but when she gets the me, she puts them, all of these me, into her boat of heaven, which she also sometimes calls her vulva.
That's right.
So she's putting all of the cosmic laws of the universe, of divine and human civilization, into her vulva womb. Mm-hmm. So for me, I was like, that is the goddess trying to reclaim her power, the totality of her power, into her sacred, vulvic sphere. And okay, so she takes some of these me with her down to the underworld, but as we know, when she goes down there, she's stripped, because they all signify, what she takes signifies life-giving power. She can't go down there with her life-giving power because she needs to face death.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is kind of like for women, right? Like when we're going down there, what are we stripping? What do we have to strip away? And I think many of us know that when we're premenstrual, we're a lot more raw, we're a lot more vulnerable. I go through stages of anger. I get really upset, like you say boo to me and I start crying for like 30 minutes. It's true. And, it's a little different for all of us, but we get more sensitive. And, right now that's pathologized in the West. That's pathologized as, just women, their hormones. But I read some interesting thinkers countering that and saying, but what if that's just women, like the veil of being able to put up with bullshit, excuse my French, but that's the truth, is so thin that women actually speak their truth, that women's emotions are real and they're saying what's true for them. Whereas the rest of the time, because of the way women are being conditioned, it's not safe a lot of the time to speak what's true for us. And so I like that interpretation much better than, women are just being hormonal and we can't take them seriously and we just have to write off,
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So this is what she's doing. She's getting rid of her life and she's stripping down bare naked, which is what happens to us psychologically, and what can feel like is happening inside when you're getting ready to menstruate. This was like 50 pages, so I'm like, don't get too detailed.
No, that's already very good. Yeah, that's very good. And, I really like it when you say that these emotions that we are now pathologized, when women are menstruating, and yes, we are super sensitive when this happens. At the same time, when this happens, or even recently, I just had a tantrum, but I told my husband, but this was a raw truth. This is when I'm not going to pretend, I don't want to do this anymore. And this is like, I'm just speaking like the truth, and I don't care whether even the universe likes it, never mind anybody else. And I think that this is a little bit like what you were describing, during the menstruating cycle, what women do with sensitivity comes like all of this BS that you have to put up with. And I'm sure that men would love to have, men very often, unfortunately, because we have no ways of sacred ways of expressing rage against the matrix, so to speak, in a healthy way, men often do it through violence, unfortunately, but we do it through, through during our menstrual cycle, I think. So this is spot on. I never thought about it this way, but this is actually a brilliant idea. Thank you for looking.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, that's right. It's a purging, not just of blood itself, but of our emotions or our belief systems. And that's really what I was trying to play with too, was like, theoretically, what would happen if we would consciously go through this cycle, letting go of these negative belief systems? How can we use this as a way to come through empowered in body, mind, and soul? And so when I turn this into a book in the rewrite, I will, I think, be able to kind of get even more juicy with that and explore that more than I was able to in the dissertation.
I really hope so, because obviously PhD is a fantastic way of doing research, but also it has its limitations. So that's why I'm really happy that you're going to write a book about it. And another, and of course, you don't have to do anything I'm saying. I'm just kind of, rambling around. But basically, when you speak about it, maybe an interesting thing to explore would be to explore women's power. Because what I see, and at the moment, I teach in an environment that it's all about women's empowerment, but basically what it's like a woman and drag, meaning like they want women and want men to teach women, how to empower themselves professionally. And I think, no, this is all wrong. We have to discover a completely different sort of empowerment, not only for women, but for everyone. Because I think we are at this point in our civilization that we see that power of form of empowerment that, now men express, and now that men supposed to teach us, is completely wrong and creates destruction to the planet. And we are all extremely unhappy, stressed out, and angry. So, and I'm not talking about women, I'm talking about everyone, and polarized. Look at our societies. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity, when you talk about the goddess Inanna and menstrual cycle and embodiment of the goddess, not, how a woman can explore a different form of power, not just for women, but for everyone. There's a different form of power. Like I am arguing in my book that there's a different form of wisdom, but somebody who read the book actually put it very wisely. Thank you, Agata, if you listen to this, that you didn't really explore power. And I think this is actually a fantastic opportunity for you, right, to explore this power, because there is a different form of wisdom that I explored, but somebody has to explore different form of power. And I think you have a fantastic opportunity here.
I appreciate you saying that. And it's so synchronistic because another friend of mine from my program is also exploring feminine power. And we've been having discussions about what is this thing? And we were talking about like softness. There's this woman who, goddess rest her soul, died at a tragically young age. But she was such a brilliant thinker, and the way that she embodied her femininity was just so delicious. Aisha K. Faines, and she talked about soft power and femininity and this soft power. And the problem in our culture is thinking that soft equates to weakness, and that's not true.
Or submission,
Or submission.
Yeah.
And I even fall into that trap. So now this other friend and I have been talking about, well, what if our body just inherently knows what this feminine power is, and all we need to do is kind of stripped away the domestication or the, the way that we've been taught to embody femininity. I don't know. That's just what we're talking about and exploring. So also I have to say that I've started learning more about Shakti Tantra, and I think I mentioned I'm interested in getting initiated. So I love learning about feminine power from that cultural tradition too.
Yes, and feminine power does, although people want to disembodied it, the feminine power is associated, and I'm actually struggling with this because I'm sometimes getting questions, and I try to be all inclusive, yes, in all of this, but this form of power is somehow associated with, sexuality, and I don't know, and maybe even our gender, right? Like, so because you have to have a particular set of sexual organs to experience it differently, right? So although from a Jungian point of view, I guess it's anima and animus, so men can experience differently as well through working on the anima. But this is what you're offering is a very powerful kind of bodily experience of that. So that's fantastic.
Thank you. And it's really for women who have been taught to hate being a woman or disassociate from their body, and which means disassociating from a very sacred female power that through your experiences in Tantra is in the body, is in being embodied. And so I hear what you're saying, and I'm I really want to help women explore what this is and to come home to their power in their body.
Fantastic. And I know that because you also mentioned in our previous conversation, and later when we move to our next topic that I'm really interested in, that which we finished after the interview, you know, I want to move to this because I have some thoughts about it too. So if you don't mind, but you know, if you could discuss some other Sumerian goddesses, because we always speak about Inanna, and she became, you know, she's like now second after there was Isis, Mary Magdalene, Isis, and now Inanna is really resurfacing. But what about other Sumerian goddesses? Because I know you also know about them, and not many people hear about them.
Right. Well, the one I mostly focused on in the dissertation was Eros, the underworld goddess. And she has kind of a tragic story, actually. And I feel like psychologically she represents that disassociated sacred female power. From my perspective. But you know, mythologically and historically, there's evidence that they were either the same goddess and then separated into two. I have argued, I said that splitting into two different goddesses happens in one of the origin stories, the Hulupu tree, where Ereshkigal she's taken away violently by the Kur, or the Kur monster. So the Kur sometimes is the place, the underworld, and sometimes it refers to like a dragon or a serpent. So she was taken and forcibly kind of enthroned in the underworld. And you know, the way I write about it, it feels to me like a little bit of a violent sexual metaphor, especially because the more you read about Mesopotamia, it's just like everything seems to be sexually encoded.
Yes.
And now that I'm thinking about it too, it could be a mythologization of what actually, you know, maybe what happened to little girls when they got married, when they're kind of taken away and put in married off at young ages and separated from their families. And I know my mentor and my dissertation chair, she talked to us about the Demeter Persephone myth in that way.
I was just thinking about it, but they probably took it from that myth. Yeah,
exactly. She said you have to understand that this is actually the lived experience of what would happen to, you know, the aristocratic girls in this culture. So yes, you can talk about it in all these psychological ways and as an agricultural myth, but I find more and more that every myth also has a historical element. It's telling us something about the culture and how they actually operated. So, and, you know, power systems.
So because actually it leads me to another question that I didn't plan to ask, because under my previous video with Dr. Celine Neely, somebody asked that, you know, when she talks about the rape of Eve in Gnostic works, you know, so she has, so she has a similar theory, same but different. And there's somebody posted a comment that somebody thinks that it maybe had to do something with women being trafficked, you know, for sex also in ancient times. So I wonder that because we are talking about girls being taken away from their mothers, you know, to this, and they were married off so early, even premenstrual, right? Like sometimes at 5. Right, so at the age of 5. So do you have any thoughts about it, that it's something to do with, and he says there's some historical evidence for this. Obviously human trafficking for sex existed always, but do you think that the myths perhaps may somehow also demonstrate it, or
the Eve myth or the Ereshkigal myth?
The Ereshkigal myth, you know, that.
Okay, good. I was like, because I'm not as familiar with the Gnostic
because with
story.
Eve, it's a similar story. She's basically raped by the archons, which are the demons, you know, and she's humiliated, and you know, and so it's the same story but different tradition.
Right. It's interesting because it's actually in this conversation that I'm realizing that story might refer to what is actually happening to little girls in their real life. I had never had that thought until now. So, but it does, you know, mythologically speaking, I think it's a myth that showcases how the domination of the goddess and the diminution of her power. When you separate them, so she no longer represents the life, death, rebirth kind of continuum. Now she only represents life-giving, as Inanna, or, you know, death-giving. And interesting enough, in Sumar, the male represented the actual, like, life-giving power, to be honest. So Inanna didn't even, she was like more like, because of her eroticism, she stimulated his sexuality, but they believed, so in Sumerian, water, the sign for water is also the sign for semen. And they believed that the life force, which came from the divine realm, came through the male semen and impregnated the woman, which is also what the Greeks believed, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah. So the myth of Ereshkigal basically could, be the historical process of what's happening to girls. It's also the, the splitting and the demotion of the goddess. And it also just shows the value of how women are valued in that culture, and justifying their control, raping them, demonizing them. When you get to the really later periods, like the Assyrian period, and there's a god Nergal who basically takes over as the underworld ruler, there's this really violent scene of him, pulling her by her hair, throwing her down, making her prostrate. And it's, again, all about male power and dominion. And there's a little bit of her also kind of fighting back, but basically she ends up handing over all of her power to him at the end, just so she can have him there and feel sexually satiated, because she's down there by herself with a bunch of demons and denzians. And she talks about how lonely she is.
Oh boy.
Yeah, she talks about how she never had childhood friends. She never got to live her life fully because she's stuck down there with all this, deadness. And so she'd rather have this very kind of, abusive male than nothing.
That's so sad. And it was probably a story of many women in those days, right? So
probably. Yeah.
I know that I asked you to prepare maybe one of the poems, if you would like to read them before we move on to the next topic.
Yes, I'm going to open it up right now. This is one that I've also talked about on my YouTube channel. It's one of my favorite. It's a love song of Shu Suen, which is basically, they have like all of these love poems, and the many wives the king would compose, theoretically, I guess, allegedly, compose these poems for the king. So, and this is the poem that I had told you about previously, that I had performed in that acting class. Okay. Man of my heart, my beloved man, your allure is a sweet thing, as sweet as honey. Man of my heart, my beloved man, your allure is a sweet thing, as sweet as honey. You have captivated me, man. Of my own free will, I will come to you. Man, let me flee with you into the bedroom. You have captivated me, man. Of my own free will shall I come to you. Let me flee with you into the bedroom. Man, let me do the sweetest things to you. My precious sweet, let me bring you honey. In the bedchamber, dripping with honey. Let us enjoy over and over your lure. The sweetest thing, man. Let me do the sweetest things to you. My precious sweet, let me bring you honey. And it goes on a little bit, but it's, it's.
Ooh, I love it.
I know.
It's so full of Eros and juice and honey.
Right?
And it's super nice. It's super nice. It's very, what I like to call erotic, and
it is
sensual, in a very sensual in its power and seductive, but devoid of manipulation, because seduction nowadays is understood as some form of manipulation, when this is nothing. This is just like, pure playful Eros. Who can resist that? I love Eros.
Exactly.
I mean, like, this is so erotic in this sense, but it's just such a playful, unadulterated Eros. I love it. And you perform it beautifully. I can see your training as a performer, as an actress. So very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm sure everybody will love this performance as well. But I wonder if it's not too painful for you, if you could recount this moment that we discussed at the end after your interview with me, what actually happened when you were trying to perform this poem in an acting school, I understand, right? It was in an...
Yeah.
Okay, would you like to retell it for us?
I would love to share this. Yes, it was an acting workshop I took on my birthday, my 31st birthday, actually. So basically I brought this text. It was a very kind of non-traditional course. Okay. So you could bring any text you want. And I was like, great, I will perform a text, in honor of the goddess. And I had really been, sincerely like with this text all week. So unbeknownst to me, I had been, I think, invoking this power, the power of Inanna. And so I show up to the class and I present this, and the teacher, who kind of knew some of my Jungian teachers, saw me as a Jungian. Okay, so he already kind of had some, and he seemed to feel a little bit threatened when I presented this text, and asked, "Why did you bring this text?" And I was like, because I can.
You said I could bring anything I want, right?
Anything. Yeah, exactly. And so the way he was working with the students with whatever they brought was he wanted you to read a line from your text, and then he offered you kind of the opposite, something to say that was the opposite of what you were saying as the subtext, and he wanted you to vocalize that. So when it came my turn, he said, I want you to say, "Fuck you, you fucking asshole." And I was just like, ew, like, first of all, that feels like it's defiling this text. And second of all, it's not very inventive or creative. I've never said that to a man. It's just not interesting.
Yes.
And but I kind of half-heartedly went through it, and he got up, he was visibly like agitated that I wasn't fully into it. And then there was a point where we were doing an exercise. There were lots of exercises, group and then in pairs. And throughout all the group exercises, he was really picking on me, and just, and he, I can say this now, feel like had like a very big ego, and he'd be playing the piano with his shoes off, and he had these like gnarly toenails. And I was just like, oh God, like this is just feeling very discordant for me. And I was like, why is he picking on me so much? I've acted since I was 5. This is crazy. But something was shifting inside of me where I was clearly not putting up with the BS anymore. And not just his, but like the BS of working with sexist, misogynistic theater directors, and or the industry itself can be very much that way, and so something was also happening inside of me, and so we must have been interacting with each other that way. And so when it came time to do this partner exercise, as I was telling you, and I was up on this couch, found myself on a couch staring at my partner, and all of a sudden I could feel like my hips moving in a kind of a circular gyration like this. And I felt this like light energy moving up my legs. And I had this just very clear, non-judgmental, just objective thought that was like, oh, wow, I can't control the bottom of my legs right now. I don't know what's happening. But I felt this, very deep kind of feminine energy rising up. And I was also, the next thought was, oh my God, I'm not doing the exercise the way that he wants me to, but I can't, I'm possessed, for lack of a better word. I cannot move. This is what's happening. And when the energy got to, it didn't quite hit my second chakra at that point, just barely touched the bottom, first one. And he was just like, stop, starts berating me. And I really sunk into myself, and I was like, oh my God, something's wrong with me. Like, maybe I don't know what I'm doing, and maybe I don't want to act ever again. I mean, it was just like, I really went to this deep, dark place with it. And he just kept picking on me the rest of the day. And then what I didn't say to you is that the second half of the workshop was with his partner, a woman who had done a one-woman show on Mary Magdalene like 30 years ago. And she was a vocal coach, and I had amazing breakthroughs with her. And that woman really embodied this like very nurturing but powerful, soft feminine energy. I do have to say that. And I really healed through working with her, even though I had the opposite experience with him. So the next day when I went back and he was still just after me, I said in my head during this group exercise, I was like, screw this guy. And so I threw my body up against the wall. And I had this necklace that I'd worn for years that had an amulet of Mary Magdalene, Santa Anna, my patron saint, and Ganesha, and it broke and fell on the floor. And I thought, oh my God, the goddess just left me and I've offended her. Oh my God, will she come back?
Yeah.
And as soon as that happened, he screamed out, yes!
Oh God, this is scary. I just get like cold shiver, you know, and
as if there was some like unconscious battle between the patriarchal gods and this like divine feminine and
rising through your body, basically, right? Like
And I told this story recently to a friend, and she was like, oh my God, she was like, you know, if you want to re-embody this for yourself, she was like, you could have used that energy and been like, fuck you, you fucking asshole, and directed
now you can perform it, right? Now you can perform it really well because, you know, so
7 years later,
I love the story. It's a very touching story. And I think you actually lived through archetypical story, you know, like the goddess of the archetype was kind of moving through you energetically, and it met with this resistance from the world, which I think is more of a what is now popularly, you know, also called the matrix, you know, the way we organize our society that cannot accept, and at the same time it becomes more and more apparent, cannot accept, and because it is fearful of this feminine power, right?
Right.
And I think that it is.
I want to say something too, because this word matrix, which I've talked about on my channel too, means uterus or womb. And it also means the source. So even when it gets used in this pejorative way, it's again like afraid of the feminine power of creation, life, death, and rebirth. Sorry.
Or maybe it is the goddess hijacked, you know, again, you know, like Matrix was meant to be something else, and now it became this, it is controlled by, in Gnosticism, it is called the archons, or, you know, demons or evil powers. Some people believe some alien powers or interdimensional powers, but it's somehow not operating by the way it should be operating because of oppression. Some form of oppression. And I think whether you're a woman, I know that you mostly speak to women, but whether you're a woman or a man, this power is oppressive to everyone. Like, you know,
correct. Yes.
Like this is not the way to live your life, the way we live our lives now, right? And if you choose different path, there are consequences that are very brutal, you know, including financial consequences and so on. So we have to claim this power, right? We have to organize it differently, you know, and differently because the whole society is organized against it. And it was meant to be the source of everything, including our society, our relationships, our work, you know, the way we earn our bread and butter, you know, that should be filled with joy, you know, and sensuality, you know, and wisdom, you know, and giving and contribution, and not some kind of competition and, you know, dog kills dog, which, you know, I love dogs and they're not like that at all, you know. And so the whole thing is just like one bad delusional reality. So I love this story.
Thank you. And I appreciate it because you said something that was really helpful to me when I told you the first time too, which was like, you said something like, I feel like you allow yourself to grieve what happened. And I really, you know, that really was helpful. And I've been allowing myself to feel that.
And I think we all have to feel the grief, you know. I went once to a workshop with, it wasn't, I forgot, I'm sorry, such a famous man, but I forgot about it. And he basically told us, now let's, you know, as we're dancing, now let's cry, you know, let's cry for the planet Earth. Let's cry for our, you know, our ancestral wounds. And, you know, and we're wailing away, you know, like, but we didn't know that it would be anything like that. Everybody had so much stuff, you know, as we're dancing. And he was really kind of narrating really nicely. He says, oh, just feel it like a water, like a fish in the water, you know, and so we just did it. And then he says, and now cry, you know, and then it was such a powerful experience. And I think that what you experienced was actually, you know, this mythological actually. So you should be grateful for it in a way, you know, mythological reacting, which is how fitted, you know, because it's you're an actress, so you reenacted, you know, this mythological repression of a feminine, and you know how it meets with fear, you know, and of brutality when it manifests. So again, you don't have to listen to me at all, but just for people who are listening to this YouTube channel, I'm going to restart again, you know, doing some I forgot how I'm saying, restructuring of books, for people. So this is a service, this is a business, and you don't need to do it because you're very good at what you are. But if you want, I want to just suggest that what you just said perhaps could be an epilogue to your book, because it kind of sets the tone for the rest, why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that idea. I've started writing out some of my stories that seem related to the work. So I think it will be in there somewhere.
Somewhere, definitely you have to put it somewhere, but it really sets such a nice, not nice, but it just puts this contrast. It's good to start with the contrast, that's why I'm doing it, because there is this inherent conflict, right? And this is how I'm addressing this conflict. And the conflict is about this feminine power that wants to be born, and the reaction of the world who is apparently not ready or fears of this power. So this is so it's like setting up of a conflict, so to speak, in literary terms.
That's right. There's this other little part to that story that I would like to share if I have a few minutes. Do I?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So after the whole me throwing myself up against the wall and him going yes, later on there was another pair on stage, a guy and a girl, and somehow they got in this configuration where he was standing up fully erect and holding on to the ceiling beam, and the gal was wrapped around his leg, sitting on the ground wrapped around his leg. And the way that this particular teacher was interpreting that scene as it happened, because it was improvised, he said, look, this man's he's holding on the beam like in the underworld, trying to escape from the tyranny of this woman's grip. And I said, or maybe he's holding it up for both of them and creating a safe container for them to exist in. And he looked at me and he goes, see, that's the problem with you Jungians, always coming up with different interpretations. And I was like, this guy, man,
this guy needs a serious therapy. So anyway, good luck to him, because I don't have big hopes for him. But anyway, we all deserve, in the eternity, he will understand something, probably maybe 100 more lifetimes. But good luck to him. So with that, but it's a fantastic story. So I would like to thank you for this, Annalisa. It was a very interesting interview, and I have learned a lot from you. Your interpretation of Inanna's descent is really brilliant and very original, because I said it has never occurred to me. I read it so many times, not even a little bit, what came to you, not at all. So obviously it's not that, it's obviously very original and very special. So how can people get in touch with you?
Definitely. Well, there's a few ways. First, I have my YouTube channel, Journey to the Goddess TV, where you were the most recent interviewee. So I encourage everyone to go there on YouTube and subscribe, like the videos, watch Dr. Joanna's video as well, and leave a comment. And then also I have my website, which is journeytothegoddess.voyage, or you can just look up my name, annalisaderr.com. They go to the same place. And again, you'll have links to my YouTube channel, some of my resources, information about upcoming workshops and classes that I'm developing.
Oh, so you information about classes as well, right? Fantastic.
Yes, I am, online and in person, and eventually I will be leading pilgrimage tours to Mary Magdalene's site in the south of France and maybe other places. So I have a lot of goodies on the horizon.
Oh, fantastic. So thank you so much. And I'll leave the links at the bottom. And also, so I'll leave the links at the bottom to all your, to your website and to your workshops and to your channel, of course, YouTube channel. I also leave a link to my book, The Other Goddess. And I forgot to mention actually that I am creating some courses for my publisher as well, but they are not going to be ready until, I guess, February, March next year. So on the Goddesses of Eros. So lots of exciting things are happening for the Goddess. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Annalisa, and until next time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Joanna. This was a pleasure.